Desert Commander, the enemy has been sighted. Your challenge has been accepted. The future of the free world now awaits your brave and steady command. Welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
And I'm Sean.
And that's it again, although we did get word from Joe. He misses you all, and he hopes to be back next episode.
And he got you all little magnets that have, like, beach sand in them.
Yeah, he traveled the entire world, actually, and stopped at every single country and got magnets, and we hope to, make those a subscriber bonus at some point. We don't plan to do any of that. We don't plan to do much, but we do plan to have Joe back if he'll welcome us with open arms.
Yeah, there's still that one thing to work out, but I think we could sign the contract by the end of the week.
Great. And we're talking about Desert Commander today. Sean, turn-based strategy video game on the NES. Were you expecting it? Did you think they could pull it off?
You know, I was definitely expecting it to happen at some point. I wasn't expecting this to be it, or like it to happen so soon, even though, 180 whatever games isn't really that soon. But no, I was very excited to hear that this was a turn-based strategy game.
And you're kind of a turn-based strategy guy. Like this is one of your preferred genres. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I'm really into XCOM. I kind of dug the Advanced Wars games, even though I didn't play too much of them. And even though it's a different genre, I do very much prefer turn-based RPGs than I do real-time RPGs. So yeah, I dig this format.
And what is it that excites you about turn-based RPGs? Because I think some people find them to just be a little too slow, maybe a little too similar to like chess, where you have to you're doing a lot more thinking than playing. Are those the things that excite you, or is it something else?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely games where I prefer that. Like, yes, this is about twitch reflexes, and this is about how you perform in the moment, but it's almost a bit more of a calm and relaxing challenge to have a turn-based strategy game where you do have that time to say, like, this is why each of these other turns will fail or will sort of work against me, and this is the least bad solution I can think of. I kind of like that mental sequence.
Yeah, I'd argue I even like the more recent trend of turn-based strategy games that just flat out tell you what the most likely result to be is based on the units that you're comparing to another. So, I know Fire Emblem does it, but even, a lot of, more strategic war games that come out today, they'll tell you, you have a 94% chance of victory in this one particular battle between your tanks and their infantry, and it's like, some people hate that because it takes the element of surprise out of the video game, but I would argue that in a strategy game, I want to be playing as the most dominant force that I think I could be. I want to know what the odds are against me and plan accordingly.
Yeah, with more modern games that aren't that aren't in this genre per se, like Into the Breach, which I guess is pretty much this, and also Slay the Spire, which is very much not in this genre but takes a lot of turn-based strategy cues. They've all sort of borrowed from that same feel of what a turn-based game is, and they give you pretty much perfect information, and you have to work with that perfect information. That's a whole theory of strategy games of is perfect information just giving you a perfect way to win, or is it another way to play? And I guess that sort of doesn't make sense the way I phrased it, but I like that the more modern takes on these turn-based games as well.
And a lot of turn-based strategy games just come down to like the setting too, if nothing else. Like that is what makes a lot of these games different, other than maybe like, one core mechanic that like they add on to addition of all the usual turn-based strategy tropes. And I guess what I'm getting at here is like, this is just, war. This is war in the desert, essentially. There's no like fun video game centric units here. It's all going for what I would imagine at the time to be very realistic. Obviously, no more does this have a realistic effect on it. But, that's what they've chosen here. And you could also do it in space, or you could do it, in like a Game of Thrones fantasy timeline. Like you can do it through all different kinds of settings. What did you think about the, World War II desert aesthetic here?
Well, one, I did know that this game in the other localizations had a bit more personality, in that like you were the Allied forces fighting against Axis forces, whereas in this American version you are just two teams of soldiers fighting in the desert. And while like when you have that context, the desert makes sense, and there's like some interesting flavor going on. Now that you've removed the actual historical context, now this whole desert environment is kind of bland. And I think that if they'd have just... I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but I would have preferred more map variety, because there are different maps. They're just very similar.
Yeah, you almost can't tell that there's different maps throughout the game, and maybe that's just a problem with their setting here of I think, as you were saying, because of in the Japanese version it was taking place in North Africa, I think. There's just something about World War II though that is kind of just like timeless to these war strategy games. In a lot of ways, people who never played a turn-based strategy game before 1989, where this might have been their introduction, I feel like they would have gotten it out of Risk. They could see the parallels there between the board game Risk and this game.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't play too much Risk. I've played a few games and was not great at it. It's a little bit more abstracted. This game is a very abstracted war game, but Risk even more so. But you're right. It has enough similarities that it could be seen as like an entry to at least give your brain some context as to how to approach this thing.
Right. And of course, the main gameplay objective here is not total domination over your enemy. You have to take over their enemy headquarters. Destroying all the opposing forces is fine, and
you will win.
Yeah, you will win that way, but you would ultimately still have to take out their king, or the enemy headquarters, if you will. A king, of course, referring to the chessboard.
Yeah, there you are with the chess.
Yeah, sorry, no, we'll see. And I think what's interesting there is there's a way to do that, right? To say like, the objective here is destroy enemy headquarters. If enemy headquarters was like a thing on the map, I could understand that being the objective. But this is like enemy headquarters is just another unit on the map that is not necessarily all that more stronger than any of the other particular units. Like, yeah, it can move a little better and it can fight off all different types of enemies. But at the end of the day, it is just subject to the same things that all units in the game are subject to. And therefore, it makes the objective a little easier to exploit. Would you agree with that, Sean?
Well, yeah. Okay, so like if we were playing a multiplayer version of this game, like me versus you, I think it would make a lot more sense. Like the fact that the computer in this game, the AI is a little rudimentary. It is easy to exploit. Like you just have to bait some units away from the king unit, or like the captain or the base, whatever you want to call it, just so that you have enough time to surround it with, I don't know, a couple bombers and maybe some infantry if you can get them there with the truck. And it doesn't matter how many units they have left, you basically just surrounded their general and you win. But I think when you think of it like that, and you think of the game mechanics more and how they would perform in a 2-player setting, it does make sense. Like, because if you want to think about it in like the sense of what this is trying to simulate, of the base basically being like just your command ops, like whoever is in the field giving command and structure to your forces, like they would be kind of mobile, and maybe they aren't all that strong, and you wouldn't ask that that group to take out a battalion of tanks, but you would want it to be somewhat mobile, and you would want to protect it. So I think if me and you played, we would be much more conservative in how we played with the base, and would make it harder for each of us to actually win this game. And it seems like in a lot of these one-player scenarios, the only way that they can make it harder for you to win the game is just by piling on more and more units to fight against.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sean, because there are 5 different scenarios that they provide to you, and they just change basically from being beginner, easy, hard, all-star, if you will. You know, like they just continue to move up a little bit. But you're right, they're not really challenging. It's not like the computer is getting more processing power and therefore making smarter plays. The difference between the scenarios is, you know, your placements on the map. Sometimes they'll try to spread your units out across, like, you know, instead of having all your units together, you'll have some on the east side and some on the south side. But otherwise, it's all just has to do with the number of units your computer opponent has. That's how they make it harder, by just giving him more units than you. And I think that's also telling to the fact that they probably saw the game as something that was easy to exploit, you know, through playtesting, and decided that that would be the way to handle it. The funny thing is, I'm sure you didn't try this, but you can actually, similar to how a 2-player game is played in this game, you can just plug in a controller into player 2, and on that screen with the computer, you can remove units from the computer's side.
I did learn that.
And make it a fair fight.
That is, it's very silly. I would never want to do that. I think turn-based strategy games are the only genre that I will like be serious about an Iron Man mode, where like, oh, I can't just save scum. So that would be a cardinal sin for me to do that and fuck with their units. But no, I did learn that you could do that. It's kind of silly.
I like what you talked about save scumming there for a second, because it's a very obvious point too, though. But like, I guess, you know, nothing's stopping anybody from doing that. But this might be the one, like, you know, or not the only genre, but it might be the most important genre that you can't do something like that, because ultimately you're better off just watching somebody else play the game. You're seeing the result of the battle take place. Saying you don't like it and rewinding or save stating and trying it again is literally defeating the purpose of playing through the map. So I agree with you there, and that's why I also agree with like not changing the units that the computer has, because clearly, Kemco, who developed the game, said like the computer kind of needs these extra units to make the game harder for you. Like, if you want Scenario 5 to be our most challenging scenario, we need to give the computer more units. Yeah,
and I think maybe, like, in terms of replayability, I do like that they added this feature, so that maybe not removing units, but you can switch up how the computer, like, what their team makeup is like. Like, oh, let's see if we give them more bombers instead of more anti-aircraft, and let's see if I have less, like if I change that in a similar way, and so you can have a bunch of different extra scenarios that you've crafted yourself. But yeah, I don't think that they really wanted us to mess with it to make it easier. That just kind of defeats the point.
And the good news is you can change your loadouts.
Yes.
And that's probably, as a consequence, why you can change the computer loadouts with the Player 2 controller. They probably just program the same setup as the two-player game. But it's very important that you can change your loadout, because I think that would make these scenarios really suck and not make them good for replayability if you were always forced to be like, well, in this scenario, you're all tanks or something like that. It's like, that's up for the player to decide. But the fact that you get to change your loadout before the scenario, I found it to be incredibly helpful. I also found it as a way to figure out, which ways are the easiest to exploit the computer.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's at the core of strategy. Like, you're trying to optimize, and I think if they were to handicap you there and say, like, no, this is your makeup, like, this is going to be how many planes you have and how many tanks you have, you're starting to err into the side of like a puzzle game, because I think one very specific feature of strategy games is the ability to also alter the starting conditions within reason, and provide a way to change your team makeup and all those fun pre-game situations. So I appreciate that they added that. And I'm sure that strategy outside of the NES is pretty well developed by now. I don't know too much about 80s strategy video games, but I'm just glad that they included that. And that isn't like a newer feature that was just found in the 90s or 2000s.
Right. And to be fair, to your point there, computer turn-based strategy games are not only a thing, but they're a lot more developed than Desert Commander was at the time. Desert Commander was favorably reviewed for the NES, but was just seen as like an introductory game to turn-based
good for
strategy.
The NES.
Right. Or maybe just good for console gaming in general. You have to remember, home computers very expensive in 1989. Just because like there was a lot of home computer video games, those were mostly just being made by passionate people. I don't think Nintendo ever thought that the family computer, the Famicom, was eventually going to become a home computer. I think they always saw it as a video game console first,
Yeah, for sure.
So I was talking about changing the loadouts, and I guess what I really want to talk about here is just units and balance. We don't have to give an overview of all the different unit types that you can have, and who beats what. It is kind of a rock paper scissors thing where some units are strong to others and weaker to others, and that's important. Every game kind of needs that as the basics. Otherwise, one unit would just be the de facto. But I did find the bombers in this game, especially because of the overall objective of taking out the headquarters, I did find the bombers to just be something that I always wanted to stock up more than anything. Sean, curious if you found something similar, or if you thought there was a particular unit that was just useless. Talk away.
Bombers are definitely very useful. I kind of I would sort of take away some of my fighters and just replace those with bombers. I didn't get too crazy with customization, but I did figure that I'll just overpower on the offensive side and try and I don't really need to shoot down their bombers if they're not going to use them very well because it's a computer. If I was playing against you, I might double think that. But I didn't play too much with the loadout just because I think that while there is that rock paper scissors plus mentality here, it's still possible as a unit at a disadvantage to do some damage. It's balanced a little too much in that even when you're supposed to be at a disadvantage, you can still use a fighter against a ground troop, and you might take a few out. I figured if they're going to do that, it's kind of taking away from the uniqueness and the utility of each kind of unit. Obviously, there are more utility units, like the anti-air is going to be much better against aircraft than it's going to be against a ground artillery. But I think they should have made their specializations even stronger than they were in this game.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's a good point. There's terrain advantages. There's advantages of air versus land. There's advantages to, like, where you can go on the map, right? I mean, in the earliest stage, it's very easy to just kind of park your aircrafts over the ocean where nobody can really touch them and then just swoop in for the attack. There's a lot of things like that, but there's no like special bonus for like, or a particular thing for each unit that like they can pull as like a finishing move, if you will, or like a special extra bonus. I think there's something on the menu for each unit that said power. And I thought, like, oh, wow, that's really cool. Like, each one has its own power-up or special ability. And then when you click on that, I think it just tells you literally, like, how much ammo you have left, like, how many units and
You're
stuff.
You're thinking of it like Final Fantasy or something.
Right. And I just thought that was like, oh, man, there was a chance there for, like, like once per scenario, the tank can just, like, fire a really amazing shot that's, like, guaranteed to take out minimum 3 units, just things like that would have been interesting to see added here, because otherwise I think what you wind up with is playing a scenario once, seeing the computer's hand, and being like, well, he doesn't really have any aircrafts at all for this one. So if I make a team of 12 bombers and, like a tank to take out the anti-aircrafts, like I'm pretty much going to win this thing. And I think you see that a lot in this game. I don't know if that, again, we're talking about this, strategy games being all about optimization. I don't know at what point it becomes optimization versus, cheesing against the computer there.
Yeah, it's a fine line.
It has a strong, the map in general has a strong favor to those who wait. And I'm sure that's not just for the computer game either. I would imagine that, even on a human-to-human scale, if me and you played, we would both play a very tight defensive game, waiting almost for the attack. I feel like because of the size of these maps and because of how enemy movements work and stuff like that, you're kind of encouraged to be defensive.
Yeah, and that's why like some of the modern like XCOM 2, for example, like they added turn timers to many fans' dismay, just because there was too much turtling, and it does make it a more interesting game when you have to get something done in a time/turn limit. Because you actually have to come out of that shell. And I think maybe that could have helped here. I mean, it's kind of hard to contextualize if you're trying to make it realistic, like there was no time limit, but like maybe a supply limit that always sort of ticked down, like we've seen in some other games that we always kind of complained about, but maybe it makes more sense in a strategy game. Just to put some pressure on you to actually do something. And you were also talking about the maps affecting this as well, because like while the road network looks a little different and your spawn points change a little bit, and spawn locations within your forces will get split and things like that. But I think like if they thought of it more as like an arena shooter, where a different map means almost a completely different like philosophy of map making. Like if they added like a level, for example, that was like a bridge or like a couple bridges and had some choke points that weren't just like, here's some mountains, you can drive over them, but it'll just take longer. I think that could have helped this game's case of creating a bit more map variety and therefore gameplay variety.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because, and I'm sure you had a similar experience. I don't know if it's because we played turn-based strategy games before, but I feel like for a beginner's game, the obvious mistake here to make is like going into the very first scenario and just spreading out your units across the map to be like, all right, I'm covered everywhere. Like when you're covered everywhere, you're covered nowhere because it just takes one unit to take down yours, and now you have a whole, expose to you. I don't know how they could have solved that in this game, given how basic it is, especially, just with the one objective. Like, it's never just like, don't have this many casualties, or also take out all the tanks or something like that. Like, because it is just a one objective game, I'm not sure what they could have done there. I really like your suggestion, not even just for bridges, but just like, it's a shame that there's rocks, there's water, there's roads, and they don't really have, like, they're really just on the map for color more than anything else. Like, yes, only the planes can go over the water, but I don't know if you like noticed anything different, but the water's only on the outsides anyway. So it's not like there's this big, moat that we have to cross over that only your planes will have access to. It's basically just hidden in the background, and use it if you want to. The computer won't really take advantage of it. Or it's, wow, the rocks would be like the mountains. Like, no tanks can go over those, but it's like, no, they can. They just don't move as fast. It's like, no, they just shouldn't be able to go over those, right?
Yeah, I agree. Like, that adds to, like, the specialization that I was talking about. If there are some units that literally can't go over a terrain, I guess they already did water, but that's the most basic, I guess. But that extends more. It also extends over to like the special terrain areas that they have here. Like, there's some walls that add like a defensive bonus, I believe.
I think they're supposed to be like bunkers for you.
Yeah,
right?
like it's a defensive bonus, but they're just so scattered, and like only one unit can take advantage of it at once. It sort of reminded me of the little fortresses in Fire Emblem. That it was kind of silly to me that they were just in random spots. They didn't really like add to choke points or anything. It was sort of the same thing. And then you have the airfields and supply depots, but they don't really add to the landscape so much as like, oh, here is one place that whether I have one or the other, like, it's not really adding to the landscape. It's just I'm having trouble like actually saying this, articulating myself.
No, I think
here.
I know what you.
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean, because ultimately these things, right, aren't put strategically in a way that they matter any more than at the beginning of the game, right? Like, you're always near an oasis and a bunker and and the roads to get around, but like the roads are really like, yes, they're great for movement, but they're really out of the way. There's no like great roads out there, so you would really spread your units out by using the roads. And then the oasis, it's like, if you're coming to them, or you're going to meet them in the middle or something like that, or they're coming to you, maybe, I guess, is like the only situation where the oasis matters. But like, these things aren't really strategically placed in a way other than the airports, which I think are important to they're not airports, they're like runways or whatever.
Yeah, the airfields.
Those are important, because that's how you refuel your planes. And the towns are important to recollect supplies. So I think, like, there's a mix there, right? It's like, I didn't really see the benefits of the oasis or the bunkers that much. I'm sure they would have played a role if maybe the maps were smaller and there was less like real estate, and you want to make sure.
Yeah, if they contributed
those.
Yeah, if they contributed to like area denial, like if you being in this one spot and holding your position here made it so that the opposite side would have a harder time even operating in that area because it gave you a boost to like attack range or something along those lines. I think that's what I'm sort of getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if it changes for terrains or not, but in general, the game seems to favor the attacker in the sense of for the particular battle. I don't know if you caught this in your gameplay, Sean, but for the most part, if you're the initiator of the attack, there's a good chance you might lose like a couple units or whatever, especially if you're going up against a stronger foe. But for the most part, you're going to be the one doing the damage.
Yeah.
Against the, and maybe that's because now you have like the element of surprise or whatever, but I think I would have liked to have actually seen it as a more, a more tactical battle where it's like, it doesn't matter if you're the attacker or the defender, it's purely unit versus unit.
I think, so well, what I do think about that is I think it does kind of make sense that the initiator would have an edge, and that's simply because, your damage in this simple way, your damage is literally just like you get a number of attacks or potential hits based on how many units are left in that squadron, or however much health you have left on that unit. You can look at it both ways. So if you have 10, if it's a full platoon, you have 10, you will do 10 attacks, and they may hit or miss, but you do those attacks. And whatever the enemy, on the other hand, they only get to do as many attacks as they have units left. So since you are attacking first, you are already making their offense less capable by killing those units and making them do less attacks at a time. So there definitely is an advantage to the initiator, but I do think it kind of works out. It's just very simple, and that's really the only thing adding like any modifier minus the rock paper scissors, how useful that unit would be, if you get what I'm saying.
The last thing I really want to talk about in terms of the units here is that each of them has a ammo capacity and a fuel capacity, and in a longer game, this will matter. You will run out of ammo or run out of fuel if you don't, if you basically just try to be as offensive as possible and keep taking out unit after unit after unit. I feel like that's very necessary, not only from like a simulation war style game where like obviously you wouldn't just have infinite ammo and infinite fuel, but also just from like a if we're not talking about the computer, if we're just talking about human to human,
like game balance,
is right, like game balance, like that is an interesting thing that you could be like on the cusp of victory, but all of your nearby units don't have any ammo and suddenly have to retreat, and now the headquarters has like time to go back and get supplies and reinforce themselves. Like I feel like it didn't happen so much for me with the computer, but it would come into play a lot more in a head-to-head game. Yeah,
like if we were playing and you were kind of lax with your placement of your supply trucks, I could just go after them and just try and wait you out and see you run out of ammo, and maybe try and guard the places on the map that you can get supplies. Like that's definitely a valid strategy, and I do like that there is that purely unit to unit strategy. I guess I would have just liked a bit more of it tied into the map, which is what we've been talking about.
Yep. One last thing on the map, too, now that I'm remembering it. Infantry units, the ground foot soldiers, they're almost useless without the, what are they?
The transport,
cargo trucks?
yeah.
Yeah, the transports. They're almost useless without those, but then you have to almost think of the opportunity cost there of, it takes 2 units now. You have to have the truck and the soldiers, when you could just be applying those to like anti-aircrafts or bombers or something like that. I really found myself, as I continue to play this game more, just ditching a lot of the field units outside of the armored cars and the armored and the tanks. Did you know something similar? Were you finding a good use for your infantry?
Well, like I said, like I was a bit more conservative in how much I changed their loadout, just because I wanted to play it as I expected them to want me to. So I did realize that, yeah, this transport is taking away a slot that could be used for a much more pack-a-punch unit. But But I did think that if you're trying to be a sneaky boy, and like your strategy is to just sort of wait for their units to kind of leave an opening for you to go and attack their base, having that transport that can move a pretty good distance, whereas your infantry really can't, and your infantry being very good against the base, I did see that that sort of cost-benefit analysis working in favor of keeping a transport, just so you could do that little sleight of hand and get behind enemy lines and take care of it there.
You're really making me want to start looking for like the esports Desert Commander series. You know, like what was it? I just sent you the other day. We found out that Microsoft Excel has a best of 16 esports competition happening, like as we're recording or whatever, right? But like, I don't know. Isn't this like the whole like hook of speedrunning and stuff like that? Like niche games being, you know, seeing them be done in a way that you never imagined them to be done. Like, I would really like to see what a, you know, like with an ELO rating system, how like people would play Desert Commander. I don't think there would ever be a scene big enough for it. But it's a shame that when you go look at like YouTube playthroughs or strategy guides or whatever, most of them are just suggesting the fastest victory, rather than what you were going for, the practical victory with the units that they give you. So, since I did the same thing, I wanted to win. I'm curious, Sean, what were your thoughts on the scenarios with the default loadouts? Did you think that was maybe a little unbalanced, that they weren't giving you the units you needed, or the you know, the amount of units you needed? Or did you feel like, you know, still it's just a matter of being defensive and waiting for your opportunity to strike?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I was playing it. It kind of was false to say that I was playing it the way they wanted me to play it, because I was still just like kiting enemies because I had unlimited time. I can sort of turtle and just let this one artillery is kind of left alone. If I get to him, his buddies won't be able to really split my guys up too much. So I'll take them out one at a time until I see that opening of the base. So, I mean, yeah, I was also kind of cheesing it. I guess it wasn't just also using the min-maxed loadout. I keep using loadout when I should just be saying, like, the array of units that you have. But,
right.
Yeah, I guess I'd say that it was challenging because I wasn't just like, full bombers, Fox only. But yeah, it was still a challenge. Yeah.
Now, I don't know much about Africa, but I think, you know, that there are probably a plentiful amount of rivers in Africa, and that's why, you know, I'm a little shocked that we only got like large bodies of waters around the edge of the maps. Because I don't know, like I would have liked to have seen some naval units too. You know, this is World War II. It's not like we're shooting, you know, missiles and you know, have advanced combat and stuff like that. There was still very much, you know, naval combat happening during World War II, and I think that could have added an extra thing for the, you know, especially for the planes to take care of. You know, I think like, you know, the Air Force versus the Navy versus the Army would have been an interesting thing to see as like a three-way unit face-off.
Another level of that rock, paper, scissors. I mean, I agree only so far that like whether or not there were a bunch of rivers in Africa, I mean, there's at least one.
which is debatable.
Yeah.
Right. It's debatable. How many rivers?
Yeah.
You can't count them.
Just for like a gameplay reason, like have there be some rivers that create natural choke points to add some strategy to the map. Like we're talking about a lot about team makeup and how they interact with each other, and how your own team makeup internally creates challenge or makes it easier, and the balance between yours and theirs. Like it's all about the units. And the thing that I keep bringing up, and we keep both bringing up, is I would just like to see more in terms of the map. And adding rivers, whether it's realistic or not, would add a bit more complexity and a little bit more to think about on each turn. If there was just a better variety of landscape.
So this game was brought to us by Kemco, who, believe it or not, Sean, we have played Kemco NES games before. I know we don't hear their name often. They make some interesting games, this being one of them, no doubt. They also brought us Spy vs. Spy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, an essential game, depending on who you ask. And, you know, but like, again, that was a very creative new use for the NES, especially in a two-player thing. And I feel like this has some similar things where, like, you know, this is a first-time turn-based RPG, turn-based strategy game, not RPG, that we're seeing here. And I feel like, you know, definitely the two-player is much better than the computer mode here. So, you know, it seems to have a constant theme with the games that Kemco releases until you all of a sudden find out that they also made that Superman game that was really strange. Remember that Superman game?
Yes.
With the chibi Superman?
Yeah, that was the biggest, like, out of left field I think we've played so far. Especially from what they've had, because Spy vs. Spy you could say is out of left field, but like I could see a better through line from Spy vs. Spy to Desert Commander than I can see with Spider-Man, Superman thrown in there too. That's weird.
And, you know, Spy vs. Spy and Superman are both franchises, so it's interesting that they chose to not grab, like, you know, Axis and Allies, the board game. Well, they didn't choose to just, like, port that.
Well, World War II is like a franchise, right? Like, there's the World War
in a way,
II verse.
I mean, the History Channel basically makes all their money off of it, right? So, and now Ancient Aliens, but, yeah, I think World War II is a franchise, sure. People keep saying, when's World War III? Like, they can't get enough of this. Everybody wants the sequel. Also, though, Kemco is not gone. They make a lot more NES games, actually. But I wanted to focus on for a minute, because there's no sequels and spin-offs to this game, just another Kemco game that we should have on our radar, and that is North and South, another turn-based strategy game from Kemco on the NES that is about the Civil War.
Oh, all right. I
can't wait.
Interested, yeah.
Now, Sean, any last objections, though, to, and you don't have to actually have objections, but just wondering, like, you know, what's the temperature like in 2021? You know, in the original Japanese version, you were the Allies fighting the Axis, but in a two-player game, somebody has to say, I'm gonna be the Axis. Is that, you know, like, maybe it's better that they just stripped the Axis and Allies things so nobody had to play as those bad guys?
I mean, if you played Command and Conquer, you know that it was just as fun, or maybe in some cases more fun, to play as the Soviet Union. Like, it's a game. You get to do weird stuff. Like, I play Hearts of Iron, and some of the most fun gameplay in that is to play as Nazi Germany and see what you can do differently there. It's a game.
Yes, it's a game. I'm glad you said it too. One last thing that you had me thinking about, though, now that you're talking about this, if it was Axis and Allies, right, or, you know, even this green versus blue, whatever you want to, you know, like, that's what it is. There should have been, like, one thing, right, that, like, made the teams different.
Yeah.
Like, just one defining factor. Like, maybe it has to do with how the headquarters operates. Like, it was supposed to be General Patton versus General Rommel. So, like, maybe they have, like, a unique trait or something.
I guess it depends on what kind of flavor. I prefer some asymmetry, but I guess if you want to make it equal, if you don't have to worry about that balance of, like, oh, is this special technique somehow more useful than the one we gave to the other team, you don't want to worry about that, then I guess you could just make it like chess. But I do prefer asymmetry and playing with different specialties. So I agree.
All right, I think we've talked a lot about the maps in Desert Commander. I hope you guys feel like we also talked a lot about the game itself. We have one last thing to do when it comes to talking about NES games at the end of every episode, and that is we decide whether it's on the Essential Games list. Sean, challenge for you, if you should accept. On your Essential Games list vote, you can vote yes, you can vote no, but you cannot talk about the maps in your Essential Games list vote.
I'll see what I can do. You know, this is a genre I very much like, and it is the first of its genre on this journey that we're on. And I did enjoy myself while I played it. But I think I can't put this on the essential games list just because of how rudimentary it is, and yes, there is a lot of strategy just by virtue of the kind of game that it is. But I think there's more that can be squeezed out of this, and I think maybe I'm gonna be more excited for this North versus South and see if they can do some more stuff. So I'm holding out hope for that, but for Desert Commander, it is not essential.
Well said. I will add that this is an example of a fun game. A game that I would consider to play it. A game that is, if you have another person in your life who likes to play NES games, consider picking this one up just for the 2-player. It is very entry level in both its strategy and in its introduction to turn-based strategy games. And that's why I just don't think it can go on the essential games list. I had a lot of fun playing it. I think I'm going to go back to it, if you want me to be honest. I'll check it out every now and again. But it doesn't go on the essential games list because they just, knowing what we have and knowing where turn-based strategy games are today, this one just doesn't quite feel like one that everybody needs to go back and check out. I think a lot of the games we talked about in today's episode, especially a lot of the ones Sean mentioned, that's a good use of your time. They're not just better because they're more recent or they're longer gameplay experiences. They're better because they've thought through the strategy element. The computer here really hasn't even thought through a lot of its own strategy. If you look at the computer sometimes, I swear I've seen the computer sometimes just select the fighter plane and just go around in like a circle to nowhere and just waste its own fuel. And I'm like, well, that's going to cost you. If you're just going to play like that, that's kind of ridiculous. So I think we talked about a lot of great things in this episode. I think we talked about a lot of the downfalls of this, and I think it's pretty obvious why it's not going to go on the essential games list.
Boom.
Sean, we have another war game next week, Guerrilla War. Guerrilla War, otherwise known as Guerrilla Warfare, is something that I thought the Americans invented. Was that taught to you in school?
Yeah, definitely in 6th grade. Social studies. Yeah. We invented guerrilla warfare.
Right. We invented guerrilla warfare, and it was like the only way we could defeat the British. Like, we just didn't play fair. And I remember thinking, that was crazy. I'm like, these guys, the British, are like, they're lining up like 60 men just in a line. And then we're just coming at them from like all angles, like barbarians.
Why didn't we think to hide in the trees?
Right. Like they didn't think that either. Like that they could just spread out. Like they have to be in a line. And I remember thinking, like, for the longest time that was just true because you learned it. So that's Guerrilla War in a nutshell. But if you want to find out about the NES game Guerrilla War, definitely join us next Friday. Every episode publishes at 8 a.m. on Fridays. If you're not getting them at 8 a.m., either I forgot to post it and I'm posting it late, or you're not using the right podcast player. So think about that.
Or you're in a different time zone.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I never thought about that. How many of our West Coast boys are getting these things at 5 in the morning being like, oh, shut up, turn off the notifications? If you've unsubscribed to Nostalgicast because you got a notification at 5 a.m., you're not committed to the chronological exploration.
You're not, and you need to, and we don't need you.
Yeah, we don't need you, but also you probably don't need us. I don't think anybody needs us. Yeah, this is just a mutual hatred for one another. If you've unsubscribed from us, you unsubscribe because you don't like us, and we've unsubscribed from you. Actually, we went in to your podcast profile and blocked you. Now, of course, everybody who's listening to the show has no idea about that because they're listening. We're listening to them on Twitter at Nostalgicast. They're posting. We're liking. A lot of times we're commenting. And Sean, you recently joined Twitter and still have not made your public introduction to the Nostalgia Boys.
The time will come.
I can't wait. Maybe the 200th episode.
Maybe.
It's coming up, folks, faster than you realize. I think this is episode 186. So get ready for episode 200, which also happens to be kind of an important game. So I think we have a big important game every 5 on the 5s. Do you know what I mean? 190, 195, and 200 are all important games. That's kind of cool.
It's going to be a fun few months.
Yeah, and also listen to 187, 188, 189, 190, 191.
All the in-betweens.
Yeah, all the in-betweens too, even if they're not exciting. You probably never heard of Desert Commander, but now you have, and maybe you played it.
Maybe.
Or maybe you didn't, because we said go play Into the Breach instead. I'm Michael Esposito. You can find me at Esposito Film on Twitter. Sean and I will talk to you very soon.
And Joe.
And Joe, we welcome you back.